Dare to be your highest and best. Books Cracking Concepts with Susan Wilkins.
So you don't want to have a child because you don't want to bring someone into this crazy world. And you're afraid to have a child because you know what you went through as a child. And everywhere you look, you see unhappy parents and unruly kids. And you don't have a clue what the magic bullet of parenting is. But it's not because of lack of trying on the part of most parents. Look how much of their life and their resources parents spend on their children. Just in intellectual investment, American parents spend an estimated $373 million on parent books and apps alone. Then look at the emotional investment. The Frontiers of Human Neuroscience reports that following the death of a loved one, about 10% of those individuals develop enduring grief. In contrast, following the death of their own child, about 94% of the parents develop not just enduring grief, but lifelong grief. So we ask, with all this intellectual and emotional investment in our kids, why does our society continue to produce a world of depravity, chaos, and unhappiness? Well, because the Western world has been swindled. Our universities teach us how to be half the person we are. Our scientists deny awareness of only half of our world. Our parenting manuals perpetuate this whole myth. And the tragedy is that our whole Western culture has been limiting us for centuries and getting away with it. Benjamin Franklin says, half a truth is often a great lie. Bernie Sanders said something to the effect of, the world could be changed drastically in an instant if the people of Main Street would just speak up. So today we're speaking up about the shocking handicap that the Western world has brought into existence, and our Western culture has been sitting back for centuries, developing only half of our brain, and as a consequence, we have worked ourselves into a broken, overstressed society that is starved of personal power and joy. So there is one person who's having the effect of changing the swindle of our Western society by changing it at the core, changing how we raise our kids. Not with old ways of left brain driven rules and restrictions, but by developing the whole brain and unleashing our children's innate power and joy and returning them to who they really are. Meet Dr. Shefali Tsabary, clinical psychologist, author and international speaker, and her book, The Conscious Parent. Oprah calls her work revolutionary. Susan Wilkins here with Books Cracking Concepts, where we expose worn-out concepts and explore cutting-edge ideas to invigorate us to grow faster, grow higher, and grow better. Today's author, Dr. Shefali Tsabary, and the ideas of her book, The Conscious Parent, has us leaping into a whole new world of parenting that can change our approach not only to parenting, but to life itself. She's teaching us how to use our consciousness and also develop the higher consciousness of our kids. But we'll go into that into greater details later. First, we need some context into how we have left the basic consciousness out of our scientific laboratories, left it out of our psychological studies, our Western society in general. And before we go there, we need to define the word consciousness. So another name for consciousness is life itself. If there is no consciousness in a person, there is no life. And we're describing the universal definition of consciousness, not the medical definition of consciousness, which says that if a person's brain loses awareness of itself, or goes into a coma, we say that he is unconscious. This medical definition has caused a great deal of confusion. It would be better if when a person lapses into a coma, we say that he is brain blocked or he's suffering from brain unawareness rather than saying he is unconscious. For we all have learned that people are still alive in the coma state. And by the way, people in a coma very often are able to perceive everything that is going on around them. So according to this universal definition of consciousness, until the life force goes out of a person, in other words, until we define them as dead, then their consciousness is fully present. Their brain may be disrupted and not functioning normally, but their consciousness is fully there. So we see how there is a distinction between consciousness and the brain. The universal definition of consciousness also says that our consciousness is the part of us that is connected to the entire universe or cosmos, if you will, and is the microcosm of the primal source macrocosm. In other words, we have the resources to tap into any energy we want, whether it's physical energy or non-physical energy, where more power, ecstasy, and wisdom is automatically available to us, just for the taking. Often this state of heightened awareness is what is often called by athletes as being in the zone, where they seem to go into another state of momentum. Artists may call it tapping into the muse, and inventors like Nikola Tesla said that his extremely innovative discoveries came to him in a dreamlike state and manifested to him in his image center of his brain. Neuroscientists are just now proving the power of the human consciousness, where their experiments such as the double split experiment that can't be explained with the left brain of common sense and logic, and seems to indicate that atoms have a consciousness of their own. Also supporting this in the entanglement theory, which is the idea that particles, however far apart they are, still somehow are able to influence each other's behavior. What about the studies that show that mere human attention on an object and the positive or negative aspect of the thought of a human can have a direct influence on the consciousness of an object? Look at some of the snowflake experiments, for instance. So we can define consciousness as, first of all, the power center of the human being, that part that maintains and directs the body and mind, our command center, if you will. And the other aspect of consciousness is how it functions as the navigator between the physical and non-physical worlds. It can access non-material powers, often called psychic abilities. Popularization of ESP, extra sensory perception, had a surge in the 1970s with Uri Geller, bending spoons with his mind, seeing inside sealed containers, and reading other people's minds. He caught the attention of the American intelligence community in hopes of spying on Russia and reading the minds of decision makers of other governments. Annie Jacobson, a national security reporter, has written about the U.S. government's involvement in psychic espionage in her book, Phenomena. She reported that in 1975, the CIA admitted that a large body of reliable evidence exists to the inescapable conclusion that ESP does exist. Jacobson says that the big push can be traced back to the Nazis in World War II, who used ESP, and that led to what is called the psychic arms race. In the 1980s, Dean Radin worked on the Defense Intelligence Agency's studies, a development of psychic power in Project Stargate. Now he writes about it with great clarity in his many books such as The Conscious Universe, Entangled Mind, and the book Electromagnetic Brain. But one of the most important discoveries in the field of consciousness and whole brain living was made by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor in her viral TED Talk, My Stroke of Insight, a brain scientist's personal journey. This was the first YouTube episode to go viral in 1912, in which she described her stroke where her left brain ceased to function, and as a result she discovered how utterly vibrant the right hemisphere of the brain is. The right brain is the receptor of our consciousness. It accounts for our feelings of oneness with all that is joy, ecstasy, invention, oneness, and personal power, versus the left brain that is dryly and analyzes and categorizes everything into boxes. Since the stroke, she healed and went back to work, but she had maintains her vibrant awareness of her right brain, and to this day still enjoys a constant underlying state of joy, awareness, and extreme well-being. All this because she had opened up the function of her right brain. But she was swarmed with letters asking her how to tap into that euphoria, and years later she has come up with an answer to that question in her book, her new book, Whole Brain Living: The Anatomy of Choice and the 4 Characters That Drive Our Life. So in this book, she explains how to tap into the right brain and live with an integrated life of both the left brain and the right brain. Is this the swindle of the Western world? Have we been duped into thinking that the left brain is the king of our existence? Frankly, yes. Western scientists tried to tell us that the left brain is really the only true brain and the dispenser of true knowledge, and the data that can be perceived by the senses and analyzed with the left brain is who we really are. And has that glorification of the boxed-in left brain thwarted and succeeded in squashing our right brain? Of course it has. And we are paying the price of not being able to fully activate the right brain, and that experience of our higher consciousness, of our non-material environment of a personal power, and the most importantly, thwarting our joy. First, we need some context into what is happening and what has happened in our culture that has glorified the left brain at the cost of the right brain. Let's march back in time to the Greeks and the Romans, the founding fathers of the Western civilization. The philosophers of those days laid a great deal of importance on rational thinking, the left side of our brain, where for centuries the Eastern world has validated the right brain and fully recognized the higher consciousness and its links with the non-physical world. And they've been able to develop that powerhouse of resources of their consciousness as perceived by the right brain, the birthright of the human being. So Aristotle, living in the 300s BCE in Greece, is considered one of the most influential philosophers of Western thought. He gave us the scientific method, and he idealized rational thought, which is our ability to draw conclusions from rules, logic, and data, which is observable through the senses. He posited that we are a rational animal, that using reason is our primary means of communication, and that God is the ultimate abstract reasoner. And therefore, the highest level of attainment for a human being is to closely emulate God's ability to reason abstractly. Therefore, the closer a person could get to this heightened ability to reason, the closer they would be to God himself. Aristotle discovered deductive logic and invented the art of rhetoric, which is getting people to agree with you. So now we can trace how this encouraged competitiveness between humans and ideas in the Western world, and the need to put ideas in one category or the other, of bad versus good, and the need to judge others. So Aristotle laid the foundation for the left brain dominance that was passed down to scientists and philosophers alike in the Western world, and which by default suffocated the importance of the right brain, the perceiver of our consciousness. We can see what use did the scientists have for the right brain world of perception of consciousness and the whole non-material world, when the world of the limited rational left brain was so much easier to study and prove in the material laboratory with neat material objects and experiments. The East saw life as more than body and mind. They said that life starts with consciousness. The essence of life is consciousness, and the consciousness has power over both body and mind. Whereas Aristotle said that human life stops with body and mind. Listen to this startling quote from Aristotle. He said, "The energy of mind is the essence of life." So this is how the swindle of the West started, downplaying consciousness as experienced through the right brain. And this is how the far-reaching opportunity to tap into the vast, powerful, non-material realm has been undermined, criticized, and claimed that it doesn't even exist. Look what they did in Salem to the people who showed that higher consciousness did exist. Then America has had its own layer of this left brain dominance in the form of individualism. Remember, Dr. Jill told us that the right brain is the part of us that sees unity, whereas the left brain sees individuality. America, as we know, is the baby nation discovered by the European world in 1492, and in those early days, folks came over from Europe escaping from all manner of tyranny and poverty. It took a great deal of courage, stamina, and pure will to venture across the ocean in tiny boats. And when they got to the new land, did they have fancy hotels and restaurants? No. They had to do it all themselves. Build their own houses, forge their own food, and carve out the new life. With worldly goods and loved ones behind, all knowing that there was a good chance that their tiny boats would never make it to the promised land. No wonder America became a tough do-it-yourself nation, glorifying individuality and independence, whereas in the Eastern world, cooperation and strategic collective dependence was the norm. Look at the cities like Los Angeles these days, where Chinese are taking over neighborhoods because they can pool their money and live collectively. But how many Americans would be able to live under the same roof with their friends and in-laws? Americans, for the most part, are too left-brain, boundary protective, and hanging on tightly to their beloved independence at the cost of perhaps a more relaxed life. So this is the outcome of the glorification of the left brain. So what can we do about it? As we already have mentioned, some scientists are starting to break out of this trap, but there are still some well-meaning scientists who are still asking for material proof of the non-material world. It's like asking an ant to describe and prove the existence of your cell phone. The non-material world is a world of different language that is not comprehended by means of words, intellect, and the left brain. So yes, we're living in a time of change, a time of emerging light, yet a time of chaos, a time of darkness. A wise man once said, "Embrace the darkness, embrace the pain, feel the pain of something not being right." And that very feeling of the void holds the promise that there is something else. And so we all observe when it comes to our youth, we see a great deal of light, but we also have seen a great deal of darkness. And we never want to give up. We want to see the hope inherent in the despair and see the promise of something else. And today, Dr. Shefali Tsabary, in her book, The Conscious Parent, definitely offers that something else. Let's start with a story we're all too familiar with. Peter had shared a close relationship with his son Andrew when he was younger, but for the past few years, their only interactions had been nothing but tense arguments. One night, Dr. Shefali got a phone call from her client Peter, who was at his wit's end with his son Andrew, who was being a rebellious teenager, not communicating, not doing homework, failing his classes, isolating himself from his father, chatting via his computer until late night. And so Peter told his son that he was washing his hands of him. As Peter threw his son's computer on the floor, he stormed out of the room. His son Andrew protested, saying that he regretted that he had ever been born. Dr. Shefali explains that this battle of wills had been set in motion years ago, when we as parents react out of our own need for power and control and fail to ask, what does my child need from me that I have been able to give so far? She said, this father had long stopped listening to what his son truly needed from him. Peter's plight is the nightmare of all parents to a greater or lesser degree. So let's take a deeper look at Dr. Shefali's approach to conscious parenting. The core of her groundbreaking message is twofold. One, using the parenting process for a chance of our own growth of consciousness. We have so many wounds from our childhood and expectations and ego agendas from ourselves and the outside world. And so it's difficult not to inflict them on our children unless we ourselves become more conscious. And a second major theme of Dr. Shefali is that we are parents. As parents, want to act more as a model or a coach for our child rather than a programmer of their lives. Her techniques are built upon the theory that all souls come into this world with their own destiny, their own strengths, and their own mission of what they have to contribute. And it is up to the parent to help nurture the child in his mission, rather than try and inflict an outside agenda on the child, for that is when the rebellion occurs. So, we as parents want to aspire that our children be authentic. We want to help our child find his own voice and discover his own destiny. We want to keep our antennas out for the strengths and weaknesses of our child and help him work through the qualities of finding his own voice, his own conscience, his own innate power, own decision-making tools, own internal compass, his own motivation mechanisms, own coping skills, experience of what it's like to take risk without knowing how to cope with failure and in a healthy way rather than resorting to guilt, fear, and destruction. And think about it. If they have not had an opportunity to exercise this power from age 2 onwards, then what can we expect in the teenage years when they are facing tremendous peer pressure and looking toward the time in which they will have to face the world on their own? And if that inner voice has not been nourished, the teenager feels powerless and lost, and it is no wonder there is rebellion. And Dr. Shefali gives specific techniques on how to build and encourage your child's strength of their own consciousness. One way she discusses is to proactively give your child encouraging feedback such as these comments. Look how much we learned about ourselves. You inspire me. You are rich from within. I'm in awe of who you are and amazed by your spirit. And telling them, did you see how brave you were to put yourself out there? Rather than letting your child be self-critical of an external failure in the eyes of others. And rather than controlling their lives, helping them unleash their own sense of control, balance, and habits of life. Learning how to engage in lifelong learning rather than always focusing on external success and results. Teaching them the how, not the what. Teaching them how to become a whole being physically, mentally, emotionally, and consciously. Teaching them the use of both sides of their brain hemispheres, the right brain as well as the left brain. So many details and approaches she provides in her book. I would call it not only the lighthouse of parenting, but a lighthouse of living for all of us. Truly a must read, even if you don't have kids, because the principles of this book help us become a better parent to ourselves. And therefore, it's a chance for all of us to collectively change our world into a more conscious place to live. So people, that's it. Be good to your life, hold it as like a lover, drive it like a warrior, and inspire it like a poet. Links below to free stuff. Cheers.
Live audaciously. Grab the next episode of Books Cracking Concepts.